Beck, our Parliamentary Budget Officer, and her team on the main estimates. Welcome back. It's wonderful to have you with us. If you have an opening statement, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to appear today as part of your study of the 2026-27 main estimates. Je suis accompagnée aujourd'hui de Marc Mahabir.
I am joined today by Marc Mahabir, Director General and General Counsel, Costing and Budgetary Analysis, and Govind Dadeva Bernier, Director, Budgetary Analysis, who drafted the work in our report on the main estimates, and which was published on May 7th, 2026. I am also here with Caroline Nicol and Nora Nahornik, advisor analysts. The 2026-2027 main estimates provide for budgetary authorities of $502.8 billion. Parliamentary approval is required for $230.4 billion of that amount. Existing statutory authorities amount to $272.4 billion. These main estimates are the first since the government adopted a full budget cycle in the fall. As a result, they include $14.8 billion for measures from Budget 2025, out of approximately $20 billion in spending related to Budget 2025 measures that are expected to appear in the 2026-2027 appropriation bills, so that's about 72%. The Department of National Defense accounts for the largest share of Budget 2025 related spending at $9 billion.
A for 2026-27 were also tabled. These include $11 billion in budgetary authorities, including $3.7 billion for measures announced in Budget 2025 and $358 million for measures announced in the Spring Economic Update. My office will prepare an analysis of these supplementary estimates, which will be published in coming days. I will say that as part of my appointment process, I committed to paying close attention to how budget measures are implemented from their announcement through to the inclusion in these estimates and ultimately their reporting in public accounts. This is a central element of parliamentary oversight. I look forward to working with committee members as to how to best support you in this. Finally, I would say that we are simply happy to be here this morning et je retourne le temps au président pour répondre à vos questions.
And I would hand it back over to the chair to answer your questions.
Mr. Patzer for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to the PBO and staff for coming. We really appreciate the work that you are doing. I'm just going to start off the top. Ms. Ryan, last meeting, the PSPC said that they're moving away from low bid because of Buy Canada policy, but didn't have an estimate on the added cost. Is that something that you can look at, the added cost for taxpayers that this will be?
Thank you, Honourable Member. In terms of the cost of the policy, I'd have to think about what that would look like for an information request to the department and agency in terms of how they've documented this as a policy change for them and whether they plan to incorporate this within existing budgets. So it would be my guess that they will work within existing costs for what they plan to procure and target, essentially quality versus price in how they're rolling this out. So it's not been part of our study to date, but I would offer that as an initial thought of how we might go at it, and happy to work further on that. Mark Govinda, is there anything to add? Back to you, sir.
I appreciate that. I think it's important that when the government has a fairly substantive policy such as Buy Canadian, that for that if they're moving away from a previous policy which was low bid. There's In your report on the main estimates, you expressed a little bit of some concern around the debt servicing, and there's roughly $523 billion of federal market debt that is coming due by the end of 2027, and a lot just basically from 1%, and current rates are roughly 3%. So that's a pretty substantive increase. So when you look at the current trajectory of the federal debt and the cost of servicing it, and we're seeing it going from 1% to 3%, what does that look like for taxpayers, and what is the implication going to be for the public finances?
So I think, the question of digging in on the government's debt profile is an important one, and it should be subject to parliamentary scrutiny. I think it reflects a couple of different factors, so we can sort of start to discuss those a little bit. So the government continues to run deficits. So that, of course, adds to the debt every year. And that sense of debt service charges going up in step makes straightforward sense. I think the part that is less well understood, and that perhaps we could provide greater profile on, is the extent to which the government is using short-term debt versus longer-term debt, and what that cost of borrowing will look like a couple of years out. And so there's these different factors that are driving that profile into the future, and I'll pause to see if some of my colleagues want to jump in with greater detail versus the commitment that I think we would definitely like to dig in more on that. And
briefly, if someone has another comment.
I think that the thing I add is we look at sort of all the borrowing costs of the government, and that's something that we take a look at, and that increased interest cost is definitely a driver for public debt charges that we've seen.
Yeah, 'cause it's going up to what, 13% of government revenue will be debt charges? Is that correct?
That's the ballpark figure. And on a per capita terms, rising from roughly $1,500 per Canadian to $1,900 per Canadian over the profile. So we've started to dig in on different aspects of what it looks like from different perspectives. And I think there's work to be done in terms of, okay, well, what's the mechanics of how the additional deficit figures are adding to the debt, but then also how is the government managing money in terms of its short-term versus longer-term debt, which has an exposure that, should interest rates spike, that will definitely put pressure on the debt-to-GDP ratio and debt servicing charges that we don't have a lot of room to deal with under current plans.
Yeah, so the jump, though, from 1% to 3%, though, that's going to have a market impact on any fiscal anchor that the government is going to rely on, right? And when you look at some of the creative accounting practices, such as changing the definitions, for capital and operating expenditures, there's growing concern around what that implications that's going to have going forward, because there's still not a lot of clarity around some of those definitions. So what impact is this ballooning cost going to have, even if we go with the government's creative accounting on these new terms?
I think under the current track, it's specified per the spring economic update. I think what's less specified is how much buffer room that leaves for responding to either external changes to things like interest rates, which will throw that track off, in which case we won't have the balance that is holding right now against the government's stated fiscal anchor of deficit to GDP. And so, I think there are a different number of aspects that we could model and provide some clarity to OGGO about. That's helpful. Okay.
Thanks very much. Mr. Gasparo, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Ryan, thank you for being here. Real GDP has been growing for the past 2 months, which is higher than the Statistics Canada estimate, which called for a flat reading. Scotiabank CEO in his quarterly call yesterday said investors are looking at Canada again because of Prime Minister Mark Carney's, and I quote, business-friendly government that is trying to get things done. The International Monetary Fund recently stated Canada will maintain, and I quote, the strongest fiscal position and the lowest net to GDP ratio in the G7. The Global Infrastructure Investor Association, the GIIA, in its spring 2026 pulse survey identified Canada, and I quote, as the most attractive infrastructure investment market in the world for the first time since its survey began. They go on to say several factors are driving confidence in Canada, including 1, a strong nation-building infrastructure agenda, 2, faster approvals and delivery of major projects, 3, growing opportunities in energy, transportation, and digital infrastructure, and 4, Canada's ability to attract global capital from large institutional investors such as sovereign wealth funds. What does this tell us about the underlying strengths of Canada's economy?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Let's be clear. There are many strengths to Canada as a country and Canada's economy, and it's good to celebrate the resilience of the economy, which we recently profiled in our assessments of the spring economic update. There are a lot of uncertainties and risks in the global context. Tariffs, the conflict in the Middle East, what that means for supply chains and oil prices and investor confidence. And to see Canada navigating this is something we all want. So I think, the aspect of profiling the strengths of the economy, you've captured well. I think the goal for the Parliamentary Budget Office is to support parliamentarians in terms of where debate is warranted, and that goes to the question of perhaps more so than the idea that investment should drive growth and prosperity, how is the government going about it, and how can parliamentarians be supported with the amount of detail so that we can do our studies to give a factual basis about what that might mean in terms of impacts for the economy, impacts for government finances. And so, we look forward to working with the government to support parliamentarians with this information. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, Ms. Ryan. I'm just connecting it to what you previously said to my colleague, where there were some questions about, for example, debt to GDP ratios, et cetera. Yet I just quoted the International Monetary Fund that said we are in the best position in the G7. Some of the other stats that I laid out for you, these are structural benefits to the economy. These aren't some short-term market gains. These are real, tangible, structural benefits. And I'm just curious how there can be the dislocation from what the comments you made to my colleague a few moments ago to the very clear structural stats or benefits the Canadian economy is seeing.
I would make a few distinctions. So I would view the questions posed by your colleague as having been focused on Canada's readiness for future scenarios to respond to the ability to finance our existing debt going forward based on the government's current fiscal tracks. That's a discussion. Your questions and framing puts that discussion in an international context. And from an international perspective, you've quite rightly quoted how the IMF views these figures and certain profiles about how Canada holds up in the international setting. Because Canada has worked very hard over many years to make sure that programs like our pension obligations have been funded in advance versus on a pay-as-you-go basis that other countries face. that also contributes to Canada's positive profile from a comparative setting. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right answer for parliamentarians who have already posed to me questions along the lines of, what is the right balance for spend now, pay later? And also, I think, there's a range of questions of how does Canada look comparatively when you add provincial debt and when you add debt of households? So I don't take away in any way from the way that you framed issues, but I do wish to provide context for a range of questions beyond, the points that you've made, which stand, but further context can broaden them.
But
Our time.
okay.
Ms. Goudreau, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, when we go back to our ridings, often our constituents ask us, they'll say, listen, our positioning in the G7, our credit rating agencies. But the real image that we're projecting, what are we telling them? Are we boasting, or is it the contrary, where it's quite fragile?
Je pense que, en gros,
Well, essentially, there is an aspect that is solid and well-grounded and another one that is fragile. If we compare internationally, Canada has a lot of strengths, but we're facing unprecedented risks.
avoir des augmentations.
Gradually, we're starting to see debt increases that limit our ability to respond to those risks in the future. It's not up to me to say if the level of debt is good or not, but to support you in seeing
Personne.
What the chunk of debt is compared to 35,000 people, for example, if that's an okay level for Canadians. I could cite work done by the IMF that indicates that Canada is a country that's different from others. That is to say, Canadians don't have an accurate idea of our debt per capita. And that gap for Canadians is bigger than in other countries. So it's okay to say our position is, favorable if we look among other G7 countries. But we have to look at that gap and see if Canadians are aware of it. Okay, so then there needs to be some nuance because things are fluctuating. Often people say, yes, but what is our economic stabilization system? When we talk about EI, when we talk about businesses' ability to continue on, especially buying Canadian, we want to buy Canadian, but plants are closing down. So citizens, many of them don't understand. So it's okay to say, all right, listen, we have to be vigilant and let's not boast too much when we're hearing things like this being said. I'd also like to draw your attention to something. OAS, Old Age Security. I've just noticed that there's $100 billion between now and the end of the decade. I imagine that the demographic changes in terms of age has an impact on this, but is there something else that can't mostly be because the age group that's going to get that money? Can you tell us what's behind that? Well, we've made projections for OAS. This is a program that is pretty predictable.
De Canadiens qui ont 65 ans et plus.
It's the group that's 65 years and older, and then the indexation of benefits. If we know that inflation will be around 2% when all is well, and that the population of 65 years and older is increasing by about 3 or 5%, or maybe a little less, well, that growth is compatible. And, well, it's not over yet, and there hasn't been light shed on that. Well, in our case, we don't have a lot of detail on what's happening with Curam and the program.
Du printemps,
When we looked at the spring economic update for 2025, 2026, we see the amount and the annual growth rate is maybe a little lower than what we could expect given the inflation and the demographic growth. And then a bit of a rebound the following year. So this is something, and it involves interacting with Curam. I'm noticing that we've asked of ESDC to provide responses around Curam and the benefits. So we'll continue to follow up on that. And you're going to send that to us? It would be great if you could send it to the committee. I believe they have the response, yes. Okay, we talk a lot about the debt per capita, but what about individual household debt? I'm not a tax expert or an economist, but the Bank of Canada talks about a high rate of indebtedness. But if the government is going to debt too, what is the correlation that we can make between those two? For the average person, what do we say about our public accounts?
You have about 30 seconds to
Ça
respond.
demande l'attention pour être capable de répondre à des chocs. Et si...
Well, we have to be able to respond to shocks. If families are doing well, then the government is able to say where we're at when we compare to others internationally. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mrs. Jansen, please. Before you start, we're actually cruising ahead pretty well. So if everyone's fine, we can either add a couple minutes to each of these interventions, or we can add one more intervention at the end. Just let me know. Please go ahead.
Since in the main estimates we see billions in housing-related spending, I just wanted to focus actually on the report you did on the Buy Canada. So my first question is, if CMHC already existed with the myriad of other housing financing powers and so forth did the government need to create Build Canada Homes at all?
So we've had a request from, I believe, Senate Finance to look at the ensemble of programs that support housing. Do you want to give a little thumbnail on that, Mark?
Yes or no? You're saying you're going to look into it, is what I understand.
We have some studies looking at kind of the range of things that are out there supporting
So
housing.
my next question was basically, has the government demonstrated that Build Canada Homes will deliver housing faster than CMHC was already capable of delivering?
So we've done some estimates on this. Govinder or Carolyn, you want to take it?
Well, our understanding, first of all, is that it seems most of the affordable housing responsibility is going to be switched to Build Canada Homes. So,
okay, sorry, just because I'm super short, I was hoping that you had a quick answer. So you're saying affordable goes to...
Our initial reports showed that, at least for now, it doesn't seem like it's going to move the needle much. That's what the result we had.
Okay, so last night, Liberal MP Leslie Church stood in the House and said, and I quote, "We are building big, we are building bold, we are building now. We are building at a scale not seen in this country since the end of the Second World War. We are building 500,000 homes." So my question is, if Build Canada Homes is expected to add only 26,000 units over 5 years, does that fall short of the government's public promises? And do those numbers align with her assertion from last night?
I think you've captured the key figure that we've estimated previously of
26,000
being the impact of that program. I think we've also done work recently to identify the gap in homes versus demographics.
So I'm more just asking, do the numbers, like the number she stated and the number we're seeing, do they align? Because they don't appear to align to me.
We're not seeing it yet. Housing starts are roughly pretty flat.
Okay, so since Build Canada Homes was announced and this government supposedly began building big and bold, as we heard last night, have national housing starts improved or weakened?
I would say that in the last 6 months or so, the housing starts have been on a downward trend generally.
Okay, so is Parliament currently being given a clear breakdown showing how much Build Canada Homes will spend on admin versus actual housing construction? Yes or no? Have we been given a number?
In our report, we had an estimate. I don't remember the number from the top of my head, but it is in the report. What was the administrative costs, overhead costs?
Can Parliament currently determine the projected cost per housing unit under Build Canada Homes?
We could potentially just go back to the numbers in the report and take that administrative cost and divide it by the number of units we believe are going to be built.
This is what I have here. If Parliament doesn't have a clean dollars to doors breakdown of the $13 billion project and housing starts are drastically falling across the country, could we say this program isn't performing as promised?
So I think the target of 500,000 homes has not been met yet.
Okay.
But yet, with the fact that Canada's population is now in decline,
Right.
I think that comes against market forces of whether the
Sorry,
drop would
I
have
have
been
a
slower.
very short
Sorry,
time.
apologize.
If housing starts are weakening while federal housing bureaucracy expands, should Parliament question whether the current approach is working? And I think that's what you were speaking to. Should we question
Absolutely.
it?
That's absolutely the role of Parliament.
Okay. Would it be fair to say Canadians were promised a housing construction boom, but Parliament is currently being asked to approve billions without a clear evidence that those targets will actually be met or should be met?
I think we'd certainly like to see more on the plans and the
Okay.
specific target path, yes.
Just one more question. Should Parliament expect clear performance metrics tied to housing completions before approving large increases in housing-related spending?
It would be good to see targeted performance metrics.
And at what point does...
Madame Rochefort?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Ms. Rochefort, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was glad to hear your comments about recognizing that the economic spring statement speaks to the fact that Canada is resilient, and so an excellent comment. I'd like to come back on the comments, the questions that were being raised by my colleague a moment ago when he spoke about the Global Infrastructure Investor Association's recent poll that places Canada at the top of the list. In fact, surpassing Germany and surpassing the United States for the first time. And so that's pretty remarkable. And in the report, they highlight that Canada's nation-building program and the government announcements of a new sovereign wealth fund. And actually, I spoke in the House recently on this particular topic about the opportunity for Canadians to be all in support of Canada. And it will partly be used to co-fund infrastructure projects alongside private sector partners. And we must remember we're 1 year into the mandate of this new government. As we speak, sometimes I sense the impatience, but I mean, it does take, there is a natural evolution to all of these various initiatives. I do want to point out that today our Prime Minister is in New York, and he pointed out yesterday that he was there for exactly that particular reason, meeting with the business community and for investment purposes. And I was touched as well last week, or impressed last week, when Shell, or in the recent weeks, Shell announced a $22 billion purchase of ARC Resources. And yesterday, in my own writing, International Tactical Training Center, they announced the purchase of 6 advanced jet trainers. And so I find there's a lot of evidence out there of support and interest in Canada from an investor's perspective. And we know that this fall we will have the very large, first ever large false investors summit. So I'm interested in your thoughts. I know you've touched on it, but I think it is worthy of further elaboration. It's such an important development for our country, and so many parts of the world paying attention to Canada and the opportunities in Canada. And I think when we talk about expenditures and so on, it has to be an important element in that discussion. Your thoughts, please.
I think the government has been clear that it intends to use available fiscal room in a way that favors investment. I think that it is absolutely good news that international investors are starting to have sentiment turn towards Canada. I think that, the aspect of that activity, that investment activity looking towards Canada is good news. What we have been trying to highlight is that the translation of that investment and financial space into real projects, jobs, investments for Canada and within Canada is the piece that we would really like to see more, so that we could provide more concrete analysis of how it's playing out in sort of the real economy of space of Canada's economy, rather than or additional to what's going on in the sentiment in the financial world.
Thank you for that. And so certainly for me, it does support the notion that it is time for our country to be bold. And I do want to come back as well on the spring economic statement, which suggests that we have a strong platform on which to be bold and as we move forward as a country. The spring economic statement points out to our credit rating in the world, AAA from S&P and Moody's, our lowest net debt to GDP in the G7, most competitive long-term interest rates in the G7, the second fastest growing economy in the G7, growing twice as fast as Germany and Japan and 3 times faster than Italy, the second lowest deficit to GDP ratio in the G7. And again, just quickly you touched on the IMF, and basically the IMF, they do most of the economic assessments of most countries in the world, I think with the exception of 4. So they do take into consideration the nuances, as you pointed out, between countries as they provide statements overall. And so your thoughts on overall Canada's position from an international stance?
So
In 20 seconds.
good news is good news. But in terms of that real economy picture that the government set as a priority to improve productivity and competitiveness, similar statistics in terms of Canada's productivity, Canada's business investment, Canada's research and development, and a whole suite of measures in terms of how Canada's business, real economy is doing, paint a less rosy picture. So we look forward to working on that translation of strategies and objectives to real plans and projects in specific parts of the country and specific industries.
Madame Gaudreau, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Ms. Goudreau, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, let's talk about that ambitiousness. Seeing in the medium and long term, that's one thing, but COVID, the Iran war, the geopolitical situation, with, not to mention Trump, quite honestly, do we have the spine required to deal with another turbulent event? Things aren't going well. Currently, we are in a position where we're able to respond still, but people are concerned. What do you say to that?
Tourne sur des marges différentes.
I think that this has to do with different margins. On the budgetary margins, well, we already talked about having some wiggle room to respond. When it comes to
L'argument du gouvernement,
the government's argument around benefits, well, are we doing things to build with greater prosperity and grow our GDP so we have more room to maneuver? That's the government's strategy. But the parliamentarians' question around implementation for ensuring that their objectives and strategies will in reality function the way they were intended to. What I'm having a bit of a hard time seeing and understanding, and only I can talk about it this way because I'm not after, power. Quite honestly, we're looking at this Buy Canada idea. What is happening with development and our industrial sovereignty? We're talking about a purchasing mechanism. So when we know that, in a democracy, things are quite active. So how do we predict things in the medium long term, but then another election comes along and everything starts over again and we have to rebuild? I'm really scared about that. And people are worried about that too. Do you think that it's important
manœuvre.
to have, a lot of wiggle room.
Conservateur qui
I think it's a conservative notion, conservative principle that has proven itself with a proven track record in the past. This idea of a government having oversight of its spending, well, that means making sure that expenses will lead to promised results and predicted results. Without that, we will spend money without results. And that's one of the most problematic risks in our government's budgetary plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks, for being here. Over the past month, you've had the opportunity to review the government books. Ms. Ryan, what has shocked you the most about the government's fiscal planning or lack thereof? Once you've gained the access to these numbers and assumptions behind these projections, or to put it another way, what's keeping you up at night as our country's watchdog, because many Canadians are facing serious issues, insolvencies to the same levels as 2009. That's what's keeping the rest of the country up.
Sure. Let me start with a positive element to say that, one thing that's shocked me is, the goodwill and responsiveness of many parts of government to our requests, and there is a good relationship and a willingness to provide the answers to Parliament, and I think that's a positive surprise. In terms of what keeps me up, it is absolutely the idea that each year the government is spending $500 billion towards ostensibly services for Canada and Canadians, and the connection between what is spent and what is realized, I think, has gotten weaker through time. And so that aspect of being able to tell Canadians, who are facing all the affordability challenges and, economic and business uncertainty that you quite rightly describe, to give them a better sense of how all of that spending by the government helps them individually and what they can expect for their tax dollars, and the idea that there is accountability and there is transparency, and I think absent that, we are really facing some serious risks for the country in a very, very turbulent time with a lot of risks on the horizon.
You spoke about, we are worried about temporary deficits, and they were supposed to eventually shrink. Yet the deficits appear to be, becoming permanent. And both, based on what you have seen so far, is there a credible path back to fiscal discipline, or is that a notion that we have abandoned now?
I think there is a path that will deepen our balance. I think that, the government has outlined that they intend to spend less through time, and the comprehensive expenditure review is meant to be part of that. I think deepening that look at what programs are not delivering is something that is part of that path back to balance. But certainly with the spring economic update, what we saw was that there was an improvement in the government's overall fiscal position. And rather than invest that improvement in either repayment of the debt or tax reductions, the government chose to increase spending again. So I think that aspect of that has been the demonstrated path with subsequent budgets. That path doesn't lead us necessarily back to the path that you described.
From what I'm seeing, Ms. Ryan, there's zero fiscal discipline from these folks. Whatever money they're generating, they're quickly spending. So they're not really focusing on servicing our debt or reducing our debt load so that future generations don't have to pay for what we are doing right now. And I don't see anything from this government, especially based on your testimony, to say that they actually do have fiscally disciplined approach. Whatever they've gained, they're put right back in.
The government has announced 2 fiscal anchors. Deficit as a share of GDP, which they're meeting, which isn't as stringent as debt as a share of GDP, which they're going to increase and then decrease according to spending tracks. They have a second fiscal anchor, which they say that they have met, but public definitions are not available, so that limits the extent to which that we can see that they are on their own track or not. I think I'll hold there. I think you've got a different line of questioning. I might not be hitting it.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Denko, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I go into questions, there was some discussion last committee about having Minister Lightbound appear before committee in the context of Buy Canadian. And I did have an opportunity to take that back to talk to the ministry, and the consensus is that we are interested in some additional meetings on Buy Canadian, and I think there's consensus that will likely be the will of the committee, and which would then push us into the fall session, at which time the minister could appear at that time. So just wanted to give that update to committee.
Thank you.
My 3 questions. I'm not sure I'll have time to get to all of them, but first I wanted to talk about our government's reshuffling of the timing for the budget, and also changing how the budget is reported to separate out capital and operating costs and investments and expenditures. So first, on just having a fall budget instead of in the spring. You know, I worked in construction for many years, and budgeting and economics in Canada is still very seasonal, where you set your budget in the fall, you're doing your tendering during the winter, contract awards, and a lot of that work happens in the spring and summer months. And it kind of aligns with standardized business practices. So I wanted to give an opportunity to you to help us understand how that has made your job different or better, and what we should expect moving forward in the alignments between what the budget is and what the actual estimates and mains are.
Thanks for that, Mr. Danko. I think that the shift in the budget timing will allow there to be a greater alignment between the budget and the main estimates and supplementary estimates, and that, profile gives a lot more smoothness towards, government planning and spending and so on. So we did speak to this in our report that came out on the main estimates. Govinda, do you want to pick up?
Yes, of course. So indeed, in the main estimates this year, we actually have $14 billion of budget measures, where in the past, when the budget was in the spring, we would only usually see budget measures in this supplementary estimates B that are typically tabled in the fall. So that's an improvement for sure. We can already start tracking. Those $14 billion only represent about 72% of the total planned spending on budget measures in the coming fiscal year, or in the current fiscal year, as we are in 26-27. So yes, there's a difference, and then it's going to allow us by the end of the year to kind of see if we've reached that actual all that budget spending that was planned. And actually, in the sub-say this morning also, there's another $3.7 billion in budget spending. So now we're getting close to 90% of the announced budget spending that's been tabled in the estimates so far.
I think that's really good news, and something to highlight, especially when we're talking about government accountability and transparency, that aligning the budget to better enable accurate estimates is really important to make your job as easy as possible, and to hold us as a government accountable as well. I also wanted to talk about the separation in reporting for, separating out capital and operating expenses. When I was at the city of Hamilton, we did this exact exercise, separating out operating and capital with a $2.5 billion a year budget. I mean, everybody that works in business is familiar with this. This is how all businesses do their budgets. So it's kind of bizarre that governments haven't done this until now. And of course, in household budgeting, people are very familiar of the difference between their capital expenditures, their house, their investments, their vehicle, things like that, and their day-to-day spending. So my question through you is moving forward with that differentiation between capital and operational, how can we make sure that that is as transparent as possible, and how will that impact your evaluation of the government's performance?
In 15 seconds.
Sorry.
I think the government previously had very solid definitions of operating and capital expenditures from an accounting perspective. I think that the government's new plan to hold itself to account with a fiscal anchor that balances capital operating spending with operating revenues is something that could advance us forward, but I think it would be further advanced if the government would share its definitions of what those terms are.
Thank you very much. Well, now we're going to go to Mr. Patzer, Mr. Lazon, 5 and 5, and they'll finish with Madame Gaudreau for 2.5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to note, Finance Canada says that it takes the IMF report that's been mentioned numerous times this meeting with a grain of salt. And I think when you look at a lot of the numbers over the past decade, for example, over $1 trillion of foreign direct investment has left Canada, meaning that for every dollar of investment in Canada, $2 left. And so I think when they look at that kind of a track record, that's why they're looking at that IMF report saying, it's not quite so rosy. And that's having a substantive impact on Canadians as well, too. We're looking at some of the insolvency numbers, and there's a higher rate of Canadians facing insolvency than there has since 2009. Are you seeing some of those trends and concerns in any of the work that you're doing?
So, I think there's a lot in what you've captured there. I think that I'd rather put it in a forward-looking perspective, that I would see a lot of merit in building kind of dashboards that would help us take different views on, the government's assertions about the positive parts of our economy, balanced with areas where maybe there's more clouds and concerns. And I think the aspect of bankruptcies is clearly in the space of affordability and also overall business climate and health. And so, I think balance is good, and, let's shed more light on both sides of, the complexity that is the Canadian economy.
Yeah, because when you look at just household debt, so non-mortgage debt, for example, has reached 43,300 in the first quarter, up from 40,200 2 years ago. So some of these numbers are pretty alarming and pretty staggering when you look at how Canadians are paying for things beyond their mortgage. There's another one among homeowners, for example. Average non-mortgage debt reached 82,000, up 19% compared to 2 years ago. Those are alarming numbers, and I know there's some pressures, such as the cost of a vehicle, for example, which is at an all-time high. But Canadians are using debt services at a higher and higher rate. That shows, again, for the grand talk about how Canadians have never had it so good that we're hearing from the government. The data shows a completely different story. And when you're looking at, this is why I brought up the point about the government's. The federal market debt, for example, is coming for renewal from 1% to 3%. Canadians are seeing their mortgage rates, for example, go up and increasing. And you look at mortgage renewals over the next year, there's a substantive amount of mortgages up for renewal over the next year or two, and they will be coming in at much higher costs. So when you're looking forward, as you said you want to do, and you're seeing the state of the cost of servicing debt at the government's level, but also at the consumer level, how concerning is that projection for the average Canadian when that's what they're faced with?
I would say that is quite concerning, and it speaks to the question earlier about the risks that households face as well as governments face. If there were to be a significant increase in interest rates that would be very difficult for many households to absorb for exactly the reasons that you just described. If at that same time the government's fiscal position were worsening because of the way that it's structured its short-term versus longer-term debt, that could be a situation where both households and the government are struggling to find balance, and that's the type of buffer that the government may not have if it is favoring further spending, further investments with any extra fiscal room versus that type of ability to withstand shocks, especially to interest rates.
Right. I just want to change topics quickly for the last couple seconds here, and that is your report on the FIFA World Cup. You said that there's an estimated $128 million classified as capital expenditure. And should the rest of the funding for the FIFA World Cup, which is $473 million, should that be considered operational spending, or how is that going to be classified?
Yeah, mostly operational spending. A lot of it is security costs, obviously, because the RCMP is covering some of that, public safety, expedited visa, and Canadian Food Inspection Agency. A bunch of different government departments are involved with some level of operating spending.
Thanks very much. Mr. Lazon, welcome. Floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à tous les...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses who are here today. Many good questions have already been asked today. I would like to go to a more micro level with my questions. Your testimony really inspired me to ask a question. Well, you talked about the importance of follow-ups and the measures that need to be implemented with the government who is, in a precarious position. You talked about the international geopolitical situation. Now, listen. In a context where a number of departments need to accelerate requests, can you reassure Canadians in this committee by telling us what measures you have in place so that we can maintain efficient scrutiny and to, deliver on these measures? I believe there are protocols that exist in the government's realm, and I won't speak to those mechanisms just now. But I will speak to transparency from parliamentarians when we talk about fiscal initiatives and how they're connected to main budgets. Specifically in this case, I think there is merit in building prosperity by following up closely with initiatives laid out by the government, given a certain budget per agency or organization or department, with a goal to allowing parliamentarians to ask questions of ministers and deputy ministers. And that happens during testimony on the main estimates. So you can request updates and know how those promises and commitments are unfolding. And you can ask for specific concrete results for Canadians. So I would say that that's my answer. Very good. Now to piggyback on what Marie-Hélène said, she very clearly demonstrated this. That is the importance, the significance of the precarious situation that our government is in. I'd like to understand your analysis. In your opening remarks, you spoke about prioritizing certain areas. But given that we need to prioritize, well, our federal government needs to ensure more readiness for any future crises. Do you have mechanisms in place that allow us to be reassured? Of course, we're not in an easy situation, and you said as much. We're not in an easy position, but if we had to face another crisis
notre président du Sud, est-ce
not to mention troubles with the president, do you have means to deal with a future crisis? Well, I would answer your question by saying I received a number of similar questions from the Senate yesterday. They wanted to know, how can we make sure we're on the right path? And the discussion in the margins of the meeting was about having more measures to let us know where we have strengths and weaknesses and where issues are emerging. That way, we would know best where to give our attention. So there are indicators that are in place. So you'd say your team is ready to carry out analyses. Do you have any examples of indicators that allow you to foresee such difficult moments? I think we'd have to put all the indicators together. And that would mean focusing on the indebtedness of households,
the debt
as well as debt structure measures. Your colleague spoke about those. So it's a matter of enhancing those measures so that we're not only looking at how the deficit is doing as a percentage of GDP or other things. That limits the debate and the context. Thank you very much, Ms. Ryan. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate each of our meetings with you. And I wanted to ask about the next steps, but my colleague asked the same questions I had in mind. So I would take this opportunity, Mr. Chair. Well, it's our role here at this committee is to oversee all of these matters. And as you know, on the 12th of May, we noticed that there were some concerns around contract awarding with the National Capital Commission, and I sent out a notice of motion, and I'd like to read it out now. You have it in both official languages. This motion says that the committee undertake a study of at least 2 meetings on the practices of the National Capital Commission with respect to procurement, contract awarding, and compliance with obligations under the Official Languages Act, the OLA. That the study examine, in particular, procurement and contract awarding processes, equitable access for Quebec and French-speaking businesses to federal public contracts, translation and bilingualism mechanisms within procurement processes, the impacts of administrative practices on competition and fairness among bidders, oversight and accountability mechanisms applicable to federal organizations, and in order to do that, the committee invite, among others, Joël Lightbound, Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, Maryse Gaudreau, Chair of the Board of Directors of the National Capital Commission, NCC, Kelly Burke, Commissioner of Official Languages, Alexander Yeglik, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, Procurement Ombud, and any other witnesses deemed relevant by the committee. And, of course, that the committee report its observations and recommendations to the House.
Before I get to starting less or speaking less, just quickly, we might be able, if this passes, we might be able to squeeze one in. I also see a tiny bit of overlap with some of these witnesses with the Buying Canada. And I'm going to suggest that perhaps that instead of having, sake of argument, John Doe for 1 hour with Buy Canada, if this passes, maybe we can do like an hour 20 and kind of combine questions just so that we're not calling back the minister or someone back many, many times. We'll start with Mr. Danka. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And we're generally supportive of what is included in this direction here. There's a couple things that are a bit of problematic, though. Number one, as you just mentioned, having the minister appear again. We want to make sure that we're as efficient as we can be with the minister's time, and also scheduling that we already have a number of studies that are ongoing that. If this can be fit in, that's fine, but our preference would be that we would do this work after the studies that are already underway are done. So if he'd be amenable to making those changes, we'd be happy to move forward with now. Otherwise, we could adjourn debate and have some additional discussion offline.
Yeah, generally, it has been history over the decade I've been on here that we do many different, we'll often do several studies at the same time, mostly around availability of witnesses. So I think we could probably do the same with this and accommodate, because we're going to have the ministry in probably whether I'm by Canada or SUPS. So we might, I'm just getting nods that we'd agree among ourselves that we will adjust it for that. So we can pass it as is, but we will know that we're not going to call the minister for PSBC separately on this if we have him in for by or say the SUPAs or something like that. And probably will be in fall, but we might be able to squeak out one before June, depending on witness availability for by Canada. Go ahead, sir.
So just on that, just to make sure that we do get the wording correct, I'm going to ask that we adjourn debate, and then we can have a finalized direction at the next meeting. We have a really busy second hour in this meeting as well.
Yeah, well, it's a dilatory motion. I will say we do have the time if you want to, we'll bring it up in the next meeting, but we will have, I figure we do it now because the next hour is just in camera for the CER, which is not going to bump other witnesses for other meetings. If we, for sake of argument, the next meeting, the PBO is here, this won't take up the time of the PBO. It's just delaying in camera. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk? Well, we'll have to vote on it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn debate. Mr. Danko?
Yay.
Mr. Gasparov? Oh, yes.
Gasparov.
Yeah. Madame Rochefort? Monsieur Lauzon?
Oui.
Mr. Joseph?
Oui.
Miss Jansen?
No.
Mr. Patzer?
No.
Mr. Gill?
No.
Madame Gaudreau?
Oui.
6 yeas, 3 nays.
You didn't vote for your own motion. The motion's, the motion carries we are adjourned on the debate on that. We'll now go back to our regularly scheduled meeting, and we are done now. So we will, we'd excuse our witnesses, or you can stay for the exciting vote on the mains. Yeah. Yeah.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Call to a point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be very honest. I understand English. I patiently listen to what the interpreters say. Sometimes I do miss a detail or two, and it's my fault. That last minute, I thought we were in consensus and we were going to vote on the motion. So I must admit, on a language level, listen, do you really think I would vote against my own motion?
Your intent, it doesn't matter, but I think we can agree to, you see that we will record your vote as a no. Is that fine? It doesn't change things because of the majority.
Autrement, je vais vous parler en français très vite, puis je ne serai même pas capable de me comprendre.
Otherwise, I'll speak in French very quickly and you'll never be able to keep up with me.
Thanks. You're welcome to stay, but you can go. You have the votes on the mains. As we normally do, can I have UC to combine all the votes into one, please? Wonderful, thank you. I will consider that a yes. Would we like a recorded vote on these lumped together or on division?
Division, I think, is fine because we
On division?
know the result.
On division?
Parce que j'ai un délai.
Just to be clear here, because there's a short delay, can you repeat what we are going to vote on? Please help me.
The mains. So we have a page and a half of votes, but we're going to, as we normally do for the mains or the subs, combine them into one vote. And the question is whether we want to do a recorded vote or just on division. Mr. Patzer suggests, because of, the makeup of the community, to do it on division. Yep, we're fine. On division then. We are now going to suspend for a few minutes as we prepare to go on camera. Mr. Gasparo, you're going to have to log out and log back into a different Zoom. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you.